found myself wondering a lot lately where our emotions come from and ultimately how much control we have over them. I think one of the common beliefs is that the best we can do with our emotions is to understand them, process them, and figure out how to cope with them in a healthy way, which I think is good advice by and large. More often than not, though, I think the view is that we don't really have control over when they happen and how we're triggered, right? To feel those emotions. That just happens. That's an indicator for us that we just need to understand something's happening. And then we do the work to figure out, what it is and how we handle it. And again, I think there's good advice in that. But I find myself keep coming back to this idea that I have to believe we have more control over that than I think we do. How we process these emotions, how we register these emotions, there's a great deal of perception and assessment that goes in with it. Meaning, if something's triggering us, right, some external stimulus is triggering us, whatever that might be, a sound in the bushes, something somebody said to us, whatever the thing is, our mind has to process that and determine how good or how bad is that. What is the thing, right? And then the reaction comes. If we think it's going to cause discomfort, well, then it might cause fear or anger or sadness or something like that. If we think it's a good thing and it's going to cause pleasure, well, then we might feel happiness or joy or gratitude, right? Whatever the emotion is. But there's a step there. There's a perception of what it is, and then we assess it, and then it triggers the emotion. And I have to believe if there's a step where our mind is doing some work, right, perceiving, assessing something, some trigger, well, then all the things we talk about, of which the mental flaws and the things we're susceptible to potentially come into play, right? It means that you could do it poorly. You could perceive the thing improperly or not objectively, right? You can use a blind spot or a bias to process something and therefore get a reaction that's not optimal given what's actually happening. And if you could do it poorly, then by definition, you could do it better. And if there's a chance you could do it better, if you could better process your emotions so that you don't just have to worry about the after fact, right, when dealing with it, but maybe you can make it to where you're not triggered by certain things or you're not triggered as much by certain things, that would seem to be something that we need to consider and go after. So I'm not willing to give up on that. I think we need to better understand what control we have over our emotions. And some people might say, and they're probably right, certain things are hardwired into us, right? You put your hand near a flame, there's certain things that are just instinctual, hardwired, that we feel emotions, fear, for example, in certain situations. And I believe that's true. But I think the operating system, the source code, whatever you want to call it, that hardwiring is based on, is so antiquated. It doesn't work with the complex, nuanced world we live in today. To handle those things, to perceive those triggers, right? The comment somebody makes, or the sound we hear in the bushes, possibly. That perhaps is more complex, and that's where our mind comes in. In those instances, we have more control over the things. It starts to head you down a weird path, though, if you think of it that way, if you believe that, if that is true. And, that's something to be proven, it's just a hypothesis at this point. But if it is true that we have some control over what emotions we feel, when we're triggered, and how much we're triggered, it begs the question of, well, okay, how is that being decided? How do we determine? Is it fully in our conscious control that we could pick how we respond to emotions? It would seem like probably the subconscious is stepping in there, right? That would seem like one of those duties where the subconscious is trying to mitigate discomfort and maximize pleasure. It's making some determinations and it's using those emotions and those reactions to get what it wants. So if it determines that, taking this new job is going to cause a lot of pain, and somebody says something to you about the amount of work you'll have to do in the new job or whatever, I'm making it up, you might register fear and anxiety because it's like, hey, that's no good. I want you to react badly to that because I don't want you to do it. And you can kind of go through the scenarios. If that's all true, well, then that means a lot of the emotions we feel and how we're going through our normal day are at the whim of our subconscious, which, as we've talked about at length, is not the ideal thing that we want processing that. It's very, very good in the short term, like immediate gratification, minimizing discomfort. But thinking long term, big picture, complex, it does not do that well. A conscious mind is much better suited to do it. So we have our subconscious running that, which is a problem. You can then go a step further, and I'll end on this point, I'll pick it back up later, but to say, well, how is the subconscious determining that? How is it determining if that comment that person made or that thing, that you heard or whatever it might be, if that's good or bad? And you start to wonder, like, probably there's external stimuli that's creating that's dictating how we respond and how we even register emotions. which heads you down this path, the path of wondering how much of our actual daily lives and how we feel and how we respond and how we react are we actually in control of ourselves. Not even just our subconscious, but what is manipulating or influencing our subconscious. You start to think about things like marketing or propaganda or different things like that. People that are really good at speaking to the subconscious and making it feel like, hey, this is good, this is bad. That starts to dictate everything in our lives. And I'll say, it's probably a point that's relatively, like, the concept is relatively intuitive, and we understand it, right? That we are somewhat at the prey of external factors that drive us. But I don't know that we as, rhetorical, we as people accept that and understand how true it is, right? And perhaps it's the greatest inconvenient truth, or one of, that we face as humans, that when you really trace it back to the root, the things we feel, the decisions we make, the emotions we have, everything is really a function of our subconscious, which is a function of some form of manipulation that's happening from the outside world, which has to make you believe, at least it does for me, if that's all true, if you are not actively working to quote unquote think better and give your conscious mind more control over these things, you are just falling that much more prey to that scenario.